today's Ford Model A Q&A.
Wade.
Hi, Wade.
He says, I have 2 new questions for Paul. I hear you talk about Babbitted engines. What is that?
That is the bearing, like for instance, where the crank rides in the block. The crank is attached to the block at 3 points for most Model A engines, and that would be the front, the rear, and the middle. And where that crank is turning inside the block, there's a bearing surface. Babbitt is used. Actually, they still use Babbitt in diesel engines, I understand, but different thicknesses. So, originally, when the Model A was built, Babbitt, which is a lot like solder, it acts just like lead solder, really. You get the block hot, you melt the Babbitt, you put a mold, and you pour the Babbitt bearing surface. Like, for instance, if you're doing a crank, you'd pour the front, the center, and the rear mains. You'd pour those, let them cool. Then you would take the forms off, and then you would machine it. You'd line bore it and machine it and put the oil groove and all that in there. And then you would make it to the size of the crank, and the crank rides in there on a thin film of oil between the Babbitt material and the crank. Same thing goes for rods. Rods are Babbitted. They pretty much have gotten away from Babbitt now. Almost everybody uses insert bearings now, especially for rods. Only because insert bearings, one good thing about it is they're easily replaceable. I mean, you still have to take the motor apart, but you can replace the insert bearings fairly easily versus Babbitt. You got to get the old Babbitt out, melt it out, and then put molds and re-pour and remachine, and there's a lot to it. Also, insert bearings tend to last longer. If they're machined properly, they won't spin in the block. They'll just stay there. They won't fail. They'll just work until the motor's totally worn out and needs to be rebuilt anyway. Okay. All these have insert bearings in them, and I will not own a motor that has Babbitt in it anymore.
Oh, interesting.
Well, after splattering the motor in this and the motor in that were Babbitt for no good reason.
Oh, that sucks.
I mean, we were babying these motors. I mean, granted, this one was the original 1929 Babbitt, and it failed at 69,000 miles, but it made me so angry.
No. It takes a lot to make him angry.
Because this thing was running so sweet.
And even then, he's like, I'm really, really mad.
Yes. But I decided I'm done. After this one splattered, that was it. I'm done with Babbitt.
That
so
really
I went
sucked.
all inserts now. Everything.
Okay, you ready for the next thing he said?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
He says also, how does a person add a modern oil filter on a Model A engine? Did Ford make that?
No, Ford didn't, but the good thing is reproduction and aftermarket does. Oh. There's 2 different kits for the Model A's. You can buy them at all the Model A part suppliers. One of them has the oil filter mount on the side of the valve cover. It is also called the full flow oil filter system. The other one has the filter mount where the timing gear cover is on the side. It mounts there. That is not full flow, but it's like half flow or whatever it is. It doesn't really matter. I've used both. Just kind of depends on what's on the shelf. Wherever, if I find a kit at a swap meet or something. Although the people say that if you have the full flow kit and if the oil filter clogs, then you don't get any oil flow and the motor seizes. But I mean, the chance of you plugging up a filter in a Model A is nil. I wouldn't really worry about that. The half flow, which is like what's on our Sport Coupe, and we drive the wheels off that thing.
Yeah,
and
you really drive that crazy.
It still goes 3,000 to 5,000 miles between oil changes before it starts to get dark. So I don't know. I like them both. No preference.
Keep those Model A's driving for generations to come.